Nobody understood the female millionaire CEO at the dinner, until the black waitress spoke Japanese. In the marble-cold silence of Chicago's most exclusive dining room, surrounded by titans of industry who spoke her language but never understood her words, Akiko Chen whispered the only phrase that felt true, and the black waitress in the corner whispered back in perfect Japanese. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. The 37th floor windows of the Millennium Tower in Manhattan caught the last amber light of October, casting long shadows across Akiko Chen's corner office. At 42, she commanded a tech empire worth $3 billion. Her name whispered in the same breath as the giants who had built Silicon Valley from sand and ambition. Tonight, she would fly to Chicago to court the most influential investors on the East Coast. Men who could either crown her the undisputed queen of artificial intelligence or reduce her life's work to a cautionary tale about overreach. She stood before her bathroom mirror, applying the final touches of armor, perfectly neutral lipstick, hair pulled into the kind of severe bun that photographed well in Forbes, diamond earrings her grandmother had hidden in rice socks during the war, the only pieces of her heritage she allowed herself to wear in public. The woman looking back at her was polished, powerful, untouchable. Everything her parents had sacrificed for when they'd arrived in San Francisco's Chinatown with nothing but medical degrees from Tokyo University that America refused to recognize. What do you think drives someone to hide the very culture that shaped them? Have you ever felt pressure to minimize parts of yourself to fit in? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your experiences. Akiko-chan, her mother had whispered on her deathbed 3 years ago, reverting to Japanese as the morphine loosened her grip on English. Don't lose yourself in their world. But Akiko had already been lost for years, buried beneath quarterly reports and hostile takeovers, speaking her native tongue only in dreams. The phone buzzed. "Ms. Chen, your car to O'Hare is here." "Thank you, Maria." Even her assistant's name felt safer than her own childhood nickname. She grabbed her briefcase, the one her father had bought her for her Harvard MBA graduation, and headed toward another performance of being exactly what America expected from its female CEO success stories. The Whitmore Club occupied an entire floor of Chicago's Willis Tower, its windows offering a commanding view of the city's sprawling grid below. Akiko stepped from the private elevator into a world of hushed conversations and crystal that caught the light like captured stars. This was where America's most powerful made their deals over Wagyu beef and wine older than most countries' democracies. "Akiko, there's our tech goddess." Richard Blackstone's voice boomed across the mahogany-paneled dining room. The hedge fund king approached with arms outstretched, his smile too wide, too practiced. Behind him trailed the usual suspects. Venture capitalists who measured worth in unicorn startups, investment bankers who spoke in numbers that could fund small nations, tech moguls whose names graced buildings from Seattle to Austin. She accepted his embrace, feeling the familiar weight of performance settling over her shoulders like a heavy coat. "Richard, thank you for arranging tonight. The opportunity to present to your consortium means everything." "Nonsense. Darling. We're all friends here." His hand lingered too long on her lower back. "Though I have to ask, this AI breakthrough of yours, it's not going to put us all out of work, is it?" Laughter rippled through the group, the kind that wasn't quite cruel but wasn't quite kind either. Akiko smiled the smile she'd perfected in 1,000 boardrooms. "Only if you're not adaptable enough to evolve with the market." "Ouch." Another voice chimed in. "She's got claws, this one." They guided her to a table that could have hosted a small wedding, each place setting worth more than most people's monthly salary. Akiko found herself positioned between Richard and Thomas Morrison, a railroad heir whose family fortune dated back to the Gilded Age. Both men immediately began explaining the industry to her, as if her 3 degrees from MIT and Harvard were decorative accessories rather than hard-earned credentials. "You see, Akiko, the thing about artificial intelligence," Thomas began, cutting his steak with surgical precision, "is that it lacks the human element, the intuition, the cultural understanding that drives real innovation." "Cultural understanding," she repeated carefully, watching him gesture with his knife as if conducting an orchestra of condescension. "Exactly. Take Japan, for instance. Brilliant engineers, don't get me wrong, but they think so rigidly, linear. It's why their tech sector has stagnated while we've dominated." He took a sip of wine, completely oblivious to the way her fingers had tightened around her water glass. "No offense, of course. Your background brings valuable perspective." The words hung in the air like smoke, toxic and inescapable. Around the table, other conversations continued. Mergers and acquisitions, yacht purchases, complaints about estate taxes. No one had noticed Thomas's casual assassination of her heritage, or if they had, they'd chosen polite blindness over confrontation. Akiko excused herself, walking with measured steps toward the ladies' lounge. But instead of entering, she found herself in a small alcove near the service entrance, surrounded by the soft clink of dishes and the quiet efficiency of the waitstaff preparing for the next course. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes, and let the mask slip for just a moment. The words came unbidden, in the language her heart still spoke when it thought no one was listening. "Nays watashi wa koko and I are you no? Nays itsumo hit ori na no." Why am I here? Why am I always alone? The question escaped as barely a whisper, but in the sudden stillness that followed, she realized someone had heard. Her eyes snapped open to find a young black woman in the club's pristine uniform, carrying a tray of champagne flutes, staring at her with an expression of complete understanding. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then the woman set down her tray carefully and spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Anata wa hit ori janai. Watashi emo onaji kamochi disu." You are not alone. I feel the same way. The world tilted. In all her years of business dinners, corporate galas, and industry conferences, no one, absolutely no one, had ever responded to her most vulnerable moments in the language of her childhood. The careful wall she'd built between her public and private selves cracked, just for an instant, letting in a shaft of light that burned with recognition. The woman's name tag read Zara, and her eyes held depths that Akiko recognized, the particular exhaustion that came from being constantly underestimated, the weight of carrying dreams that others couldn't see. But there was something else there too, a quiet strength that spoke of someone who had chosen to nurture hope despite every reason to abandon it. Akiko started, then stopped, unsure which language would carry the weight of her surprise. Zara stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Ganbat kudasai. Anata wa tsuyoi hito disu." Please hang in there. You are a strong person. Before Akiko could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made them both freeze. Richard's voice echoed down the hallway. "Akiko? Is everything all right? We're about to start the presentation." Zara immediately stepped back, her expression shifting into professional neutrality as she picked up her tray. But for just a moment, her eyes met Akiko's again, and in that glance passed something electric. Recognition, possibility, and the dangerous promise of being truly seen. "Coming," Akiko called, her voice steadier than she felt. She straightened her jacket, rebuilt her mask, and walked back toward the dining room where men worth billions waited to judge her worthiness. But something had changed in that alcove. The perfect armor she wore had developed a crack, and through it, she could feel the unfamiliar warmth of connection threatening to transform everything she thought she knew about survival in America's corridors of power. As she rejoined the table, she caught a glimpse of Zara serving wine to the far end, moving with graceful efficiency through a world that saw her uniform before her humanity. Their eyes met across the room one more time, and Akiko felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The possibility that she wasn't as alone as she'd always believed. The presentation would continue, the deals would be made or broken, but the real story, the one that mattered, had begun in a language that tasted like home. The silence stretched like a taut wire across the dining room. Every conversation had stopped. Every fork suspended mid-air. Every eye fixed on the impossible moment where worlds had just collided in 3 soft syllables of Japanese. Akiko's face burned with the heat of exposure. Her carefully constructed facade, 20 years of perfecting the right accent, the right responses, the right version of herself, had cracked open in an instant. She could feel the weight of judgmental stares from Goldman's managing director, the barely concealed smirks from the hedge fund princes who'd never quite accepted her presence at their table. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice pitched higher than usual, reverting to the over-apologetic tone she'd worked years to eliminate. "I was just thinking out loud. Sometimes I slip into." She gestured vaguely, as if her mother tongue were some embarrassing medical condition. Robert Whitman, the silver-haired patriarch of Whitman Capital, leaned back in his chair with the expression of a man who just solved a puzzle. "I had no idea you spoke Chinese, Akiko." "How fascinating." "Japanese," she corrected automatically, then immediately regretted it. The correction felt like admitting guilt. Of course. Whitman waved his hand dismissively. "All sounds the same to me, honestly. The important thing is that you're here now, speaking our language, playing in our arena." He raised his wine glass. "To successful assimilation." The toast felt like a slap. Around the table, crystal clinked against crystal, sealing some unspoken contract about who belonged and who was merely visiting. Akiko forced herself to lift her glass, to smile, to swallow both wine and dignity. From the corner of her vision, she caught a flash of movement. The waitress, Zara, her name tag had read, was refilling water glasses with mechanical precision, but her shoulders carried a tension that hadn't been there before. When she reached Akiko's place setting, her hands trembled almost imperceptibly. "Excuse me," Akiko said as Zara leaned close to pour. "I didn't mean to. What you heard earlier." Zara's eyes met hers for just a fraction of a second. "I didn't hear anything, ma'am." Her voice was perfectly neutral, professionally invisible. "Would you like more bread?" The formal distance felt like a door slamming shut. Of course. What had Akiko expected? That a moment of shared language could bridge the canyon between their worlds? That acknowledgement could exist without consequence? She was the CEO of Chen Dynamics, sitting at a table worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Zara was hired to help, paid to be background scenery in other people's important conversations. "No, thank you," Akiko whispered. As Zara moved away, Akiko noticed the small notebook tucked into her apron pocket, pages worn soft from handling. Japanese characters peeked from the corners, not the simplified katakana that tourists learned, but the complex kanji that took years to master. This wasn't casual interest. This was devotion. "Now then," Whitman continued, apparently unaware of the undercurrent of tension, Let's discuss your expansion into the European markets. I assume you'll be taking more Western approach to those negotiations. The question landed like a coded message. Be less Asian. Be more like us. Erase whatever made you different and difficult to categorize. Absolutely, Akiko heard herself saying. My team has developed strategies specifically tailored to American business practices. Each word felt like a small betrayal of her grandfather, who'd built his first company on principles of honor and patience that had no place in quarterly earnings reports. The conversation flowed around her. Market projections, competitive analysis, acquisition targets, but her mind kept drifting to the moment of recognition in Zara's eyes. Someone had understood her, truly understood, and she'd responded by retreating behind the same walls that had protected and isolated her for decades. Across the room, Zara moved between tables like a ghost, invisible to everyone except Akiko. She watched the waitress navigate conversations she wasn't part of, serve people who looked through her, exist in the margins of a world that needed her labor but not her humanity. It was a different kind of performance than Akiko's own, but equally exhausting. During a lull in conversation, Akiko excused herself to the restroom. The hallway felt cool after the suffocating warmth of the dining room. She pressed her palms against the marble countertop and stared at her reflection. The same face her grandmother had kissed goodbye at Tokyo Station in 1952, now wearing the mask of American success. The door opened behind her. Zara entered, ostensibly to check supplies, but Akiko caught her glance in the mirror. You didn't have to pretend you didn't understand, Akiko said softly. Zara's hands stilled on the paper towel dispenser. And you didn't have to pretend you were sorry for speaking your own language. The truth hung between them, sharp and uncomfortable. Two women on opposite sides of Chicago's brutal social hierarchy, both experts in making themselves smaller to fit the spaces others had carved out for them. It's complicated, Akiko said finally. Yeah. Zara's voice carried weight that had nothing to do with her job description. I imagine it is. They stood in silence, the gap between their worlds somehow feeling both insurmountable and paper-thin. Then Zara straightened, professional mask sliding back into place. I should get back to work. Of course. But neither moved. The moment stretched, full of words they couldn't say, connections they couldn't afford to acknowledge. Finally, Zara pushed open the door, leaving Akiko alone with her reflection and the echo of understanding that felt more dangerous than any hostile takeover. When Akiko returned to the table, she buried herself in spreadsheets and profit margins, speaking only the language of success. But across the room, she felt the weight of recognition, and the heavier weight of having turned away from it. The announcement crackled through Chicago O'Hare speakers like a death sentence. Due to severe thunderstorm warnings across the Midwest, all flights departing after 9 p.m. have been canceled. Passengers are advised to seek alternate arrangements. Akiko stared at the departure board in disbelief, watching her San Francisco flight blink from delayed to canceled in cruel red letters. Around her, the terminal erupted in frustrated groans and frantic phone calls. She pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. Every hotel within 50 miles of the airport was booked solid with stranded travelers. This can't be happening, she muttered in Japanese, forgetting herself in the chaos. Kyuso. I am a sugu kiru hitsuyu jie aru. She needed to get home immediately. Onaji kimochi desu. The voice behind her was soft, familiar. I feel the same way. Akiko spun around to find Zara standing 3 feet away, still in her server's uniform but with a worn leather messenger bag slung across her shoulder. The waitress from the restaurant looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable outside the controlled environment of the dining room. But her dark eyes held that same quiet intelligence that had startled Akiko hours earlier. "You," Akiko breathed, then caught herself. "I mean, what are you doing here?" "Same thing as you, I imagine. Trying to get somewhere that isn't here." Zara gestured toward the departure board. "My flight to Detroit got axed too. I was visiting my grandmother in Chinatown before my shift." She paused, studying Akiko's face. "You looked like you needed someone who understood." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had asked for but both desperately needed. Akiko's first instinct was to retreat, to find a quiet corner where she could make calls and solve this logistical nightmare with the efficiency that had built her empire. But something in Zara's expression, not pity, not judgment, just recognition, kept her rooted in place. "The airline is putting people up in an overflow shelter at the Marriott," Zara continued. "But I heard it's first come, first serve, and the line's already around the block. There's a 24-hour lounge on Concourse C that's not too crowded. I was heading there to wait it out." Akiko glanced around the terminal, at the families claiming patches of floor like refugees, at the business travelers shouting into phones about missed meetings. Her own phone had been buzzing non-stop with messages from her board, her investors, her assistant trying to reschedule the next day's presentations. The weight of disappointing everyone pressed against her chest like a physical force. "Shaganai," she whispered, "it can't be helped." "Exactly," Zara said with a small smile. "Come on. I've got a credit card that'll get us into the lounge, and I saw them setting up cots. Better than sleeping on these marble floors." The United Club Lounge felt like a lifeboat in the chaos, dimly lit and mercifully quiet compared to the terminal outside. Most of the leather chairs were occupied by exhausted travelers, but Zara led them to a corner near the windows where they could see lightning splitting the sky over Lake Michigan. The storm that had trapped them raged with biblical intensity, turning the night purple and silver. They settled into adjacent armchairs, and for several minutes neither spoke. Akiko checked her phone obsessively, firing off emails to her team, rescheduling calls, trying to minimize the damage of her absence. But her eyes kept drifting to Zara, who had pulled out a battered paperback, Norwegian would by Haruki Murakami, with Japanese characters penciled in the margins. "You read Murakami in the original?" Akiko asked despite herself. Zara looked up, surprised. "When I can. My Japanese isn't perfect, but there's something about the way he uses silence that gets lost in translation, you know? The pause between words that says everything." Akiko felt something crack open in her chest. When was the last time someone had used the word ma in her presence? When was the last time anyone had understood that some concepts couldn't be translated, only felt? "How long have you been studying?" she asked, her voice softer than it had been all evening. 7 years. I started in college, kept going even when everyone said it was impractical." Zara closed the book, keeping her finger marking the page. "I wanted to teach English in Japan, maybe work as a translator. Life got in the way." "Life has a way of doing that." They fell into silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, and inside, the lounge grew quieter as travelers claimed makeshift beds wherever they could find space. A flight attendant distributed thin airline blankets and tiny pillows, apologizing for the circumstances. "This is surreal," Akiko said, accepting a blanket that probably cost less than her morning coffee. "This morning I was preparing to pitch to the most powerful venture capitalists in America. Tonight I'm camping out in an airport lounge with—" She stopped herself. "With the help," Zara finished quietly. "That's not what I meant." Isn't it? There was no anger in Zara's voice, just tired understanding. It's okay. I know how the world works. I know what I look like to people like you. People like me. Successful. Important. The kind of person who matters. Zara adjusted her blanket, looking suddenly older than her years. I've been invisible my whole life. At the restaurant, at school, on the street. People look through me like I'm furniture. Except tonight, when you heard me speak Japanese, you saw me. For just a moment, I existed. The words hit Akiko like a physical blow. She thought of all the servers, assistants, cleaning staff who had drifted through her life like ghosts, faces she'd never bothered to memorize, names she'd never learned. How many of them carried secret languages, hidden dreams, stories that would shatter her assumptions about who mattered and who didn't? Gomen nasai, she whispered. I'm sorry. Daijobu, Zara replied. It's okay. Thunder crashed overhead, shaking the windows, and both women looked up at the storm that had forced them into this unlikely alliance. Neither of them knew that by morning, everything they thought they understood about themselves would be different. The storm had turned Chicago O'Hare into a refugee camp of the well-dressed. Akiko and Zara found themselves in Terminal 3's delayed flight lounge at 2 a.m., the space eerily quiet except for the occasional announcement about weather delays and the soft hum of overworked coffee machines. They'd claimed opposite corners initially, but somehow gravity had pulled them toward the center, sitting across from each other at a small table littered with untouched airline pretzels. You want to know something funny? Zara said, her fingers tracing patterns on the plastic tabletop. I've been studying Japanese for 8 years, and tonight was the first time I've ever spoken it to someone who actually understood the cultural context behind the words. Akiko looked up from her phone, where she'd been pretending to read emails for the past 20 minutes. What do you mean? Gammon, Zara said softly. When you whispered it at the dinner table tonight, I knew exactly what you meant, but not just the translation. The weight of it. My grandmother used to talk about endurance the same way. How black women in the South had to swallow their pride, their pain, their truth just to survive another day. The words hit Akiko like ice water. She set down her phone completely, her corporate mask finally beginning to crack. You heard that. I hear a lot of things people don't think I notice. Zara's laugh held no bitterness, just tired acceptance. When you're invisible, you become really good at seeing and hearing everything. Your gammon sounded exactly like my grandmother's. Just keep your head down, baby girl. Akiko felt something loosening in her chest, a knot she'd carried for so many years she'd forgotten it was there. My mother used to say that word like a prayer. Gammon, Akiko-chan. Endure with dignity. Show them we belong here. She cleaned hotel rooms at night after working as a translator during the day, just so I could go to private school in Palo Alto instead of the public school in Chinatown. Where is she now? Gone. 3 years ago. Cancer. The words still felt like swallowing glass. She died believing she'd given me everything I needed to succeed in America. She never knew that succeeding meant I had to pretend she didn't exist. Zara leaned forward, her voice gentle but direct. Is that what tonight was about? Pretending. Akiko's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. Do you know what they call me behind my back? The Ice Queen. Dragon Lady. They think I'm cold, calculating, and emotionless. But the truth is, I'm so afraid of them seeing any weakness, any hint that I don't belong in their world, that I've forgotten how to be human around them. She pulled out her phone and showed Zara a photo, a younger version of herself at a family dinner, laughing so hard she was crying, chopsticks frozen halfway to her mouth. This was taken 6 months before I got my first major funding round. Look at my face. When's the last time you saw me smile like that tonight? Never, Zara admitted. At dinner, you looked like you were performing surgery on yourself from the inside. That's exactly what it feels like. Akiko's voice was barely a whisper. Every board meeting, every investor presentation, every interview. I'm cutting away pieces of who I really am until there's nothing left but what they expect to see. Zara was quiet for a long moment, studying the photo. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of recognition. I know that feeling. Different battlefield, same war. What do you mean? Zara pulled out her own phone, scrolling to a video she'd clearly watched many times. It showed her at a podium in what looked like a university lecture hall, speaking fluent Japanese to a room full of rapt students. She was animated, passionate, completely alive in a way that seemed impossible for the quiet woman who'd served dinner 4 hours ago. This was from a guest lecture I gave at Northwestern last year. One of my professors knew I was fluent and asked me to speak to his East Asian Studies class about linguistic cultural bridges. Her smile was proud and sad at the same time. For 50 minutes, I wasn't just a waitress. I was an educator, a cultural interpreter, someone whose thoughts mattered. You're magnificent in this, Akiko breathed, watching Zara's transformation on screen. Why aren't you teaching full-time? Same reason you hide your heritage, probably. Economics. Reality. Fear. Zara tucked the phone away. I make more money serving dinner to people who don't see me than I would teaching kids who might actually learn something from me. My mom needs her medication, my little brother needs college tuition, and dreams don't pay bills in Detroit. But you're brilliant. You could what? Apply for positions that require experience I can't get because I'm too busy working 3 jobs to take unpaid internships? Submit to programs that want candidates who've had the luxury of studying abroad. Zara's voice wasn't angry, just exhausted. The same system that made you hide your culture is the one that keeps me serving it instead of teaching it. Have you ever felt trapped between your dreams and your responsibilities? What sacrifices have you made for your family? And do you think there's ever a way to honor both? Drop a comment and let's discuss this together. Akiko stared at this woman who'd somehow articulated the paradox she'd never been able to name. Here was someone who'd chosen to embrace another culture while Akiko had spent decades running from her own. Yet they'd both ended up invisible, just in different ways. You know what the cruelest part is? Akiko said finally. Tonight, when you responded to me in Japanese, was the first time in years that I felt like someone actually heard me. Not the CEO, not the success story, not the token diversity hire who made it. Just me. Watashi. Zara's eyes glistened. And when you looked at me, really looked at me, after I spoke, it was the first time in years that someone saw me as more than just hands to refill their water glass. They sat in silence, the airport humming around them like a mechanical lullaby. Outside, Chicago slept under its blanket of storms, but inside this small bubble of fluorescent light, 2 women who'd spent their lives feeling misunderstood had finally found someone who understood perfectly. Can I ask you something? Zara said eventually. Why did you choose Japanese? Of all the languages you could have learned, why that one? Zara's smile was soft, remembering. I was 16, working at a family restaurant in Detroit after school. There was this old Japanese businessman who came in every Tuesday, always sat alone, always ordered the same thing. He looked so lonely. like he was carrying the weight of the world but had no one to share the burden with. She paused, collecting her thoughts. One day, he was having trouble explaining to our cook that he was allergic to shellfish, and I could see the frustration in his eyes. So I went home that night and looked up how to say, "no shellfish" in Japanese. The next Tuesday when he came in, I said it to him. "Ebi nashi da onagai shimasu." He cried, Akiko guessed. He cried. And then he smiled, this beautiful, genuine smile, and said, "Thank you for seeing me." Not in Japanese, but in English. But I understood that being seen, really seen, doesn't require a shared language. It requires a shared willingness to try. Akiko felt tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in years finally spilling over. "He sounds like my father." He used to say that the hardest part about immigrating wasn't learning English. It was learning to be invisible in his own skin. What would he think of who you've become? The question hung in the air like smoke. Akiko thought of her father, who died 5 years ago, still believing that assimilation was the only path to acceptance. He'd been so proud when she'd made her first million, so convinced that financial success meant she'd finally, truly made it in America. "I think he'd be proud and heartbroken at the same time," she admitted. "Proud that I achieved everything he dreamed of. Heartbroken that I achieved it by becoming someone he wouldn't recognize." "It's not too late to become someone you both would recognize," Zara said gently. "Isn't it? I'm 42 years old. I've built an entire empire on being exactly what the market expects from me. You can't just change the fundamental architecture of your life overnight." "No," Zara agreed. "But you can start with one conversation, one moment of truth, one decision to stop performing and start existing." Akiko looked around the empty terminal, at this strange purgatory where she'd accidentally found the most honest conversation of her adult life. Is that what tonight was? A decision to exist? Maybe. Or maybe it was just two women who got tired of being alone in rooms full of people who don't see them. The intercom crackled to life. "Attention passengers, due to continuing severe weather, all flights have been canceled until 6 a.m. We apologize for the inconvenience." A collective groan rose from the scattered travelers, but Akiko found herself almost relieved. She wasn't ready for this conversation to end, wasn't ready to return to the world where she was the ice queen and Zara was invisible. Here, in this fluorescent-lit limbo, they could be exactly who they were without apology or performance. "Looks like we're stuck together a little longer," Zara observed. "Good," Akiko said, surprising herself with the honesty. "I'm not ready to go back to pretending yet." "What would happen if you didn't?" "Go back to pretending, I mean." It was the question Akiko had been avoiding for years, the one that kept her awake at 3 a.m. staring at her Manhattan ceiling. "I don't know. And that terrifies me more than any hostile takeover or market crash ever could." "Fear of the unknown," Zara nodded. "I understand that. But what scares you more, the possibility of failure, or the certainty of living the rest of your life as someone else's idea of who you should be?" The airport lounge had transformed into their private sanctuary. Around 2 a.m., most travelers had surrendered to uncomfortable sleep across vinyl chairs, but Akiko and Zara had claimed a quiet corner where floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Chicago's skyline glittering through the persistent rain. "Watashi no kokoro wa totemo tsukuretamasu," Akiko whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of late-night flights. "My heart is so tired." Zara's response came without hesitation, her pronunciation flawless despite her Detroit accent coloring the vowels. "Kokoro ga tsukurai ritoki, yasumu koto ga hitsu desueni." When the heart is tired, Rest is necessary, isn't it? Something cracked open in Akiko's chest. For 15 years, she'd spoken Japanese only to herself, and now this woman, this stranger who served overpriced steaks to people who never bothered learning her name, was offering her sole refuge in the language of her childhood. How? Akiko asked, switching back to English but keeping her voice soft. How did you learn to speak like that? Like you understand not just the words, but the weight behind them. Zara tucked one leg under herself, cradling a cup of terrible airport coffee like it was precious tea. My grandmother raised me after my parents died. Car accident when I was 8. She worked nights cleaning office buildings downtown, and I'd go with her sometimes when she couldn't find a sitter. Those buildings were full of international companies, and I'd hear all these different languages echoing through empty hallways. She paused, her fingers tracing patterns on the cup's rim. There was this one floor, Yamamoto Industries. They always left their language learning CDs scattered around, and Grandma would let me take the ones they threw away. I taught myself Japanese listening to Garbage Day Treasures while she vacuumed boardrooms at 3 a.m. Akiko felt tears building behind her carefully applied makeup. You learned my language from discarded dreams. Maybe. But it became my dream too. I've been saving for 3 years to teach English in Kyoto. Every double shift, every rude customer who calls me girl instead of my name, it all goes into my Japan fund. Zara's eyes sparkled with something Akiko recognized as the same hunger that had driven her through Harvard, through her first startup failure, through every man who told her to smile more in board meetings. Yumwa e kiramanade, Akiko said. Don't give up on your dreams. Anata mo onaji desu. You too. They sat in comfortable silence, watching a maintenance crew prepare planes for morning departures. Akiko found herself talking about things she'd never shared with her therapist, her ex-husband, or the handful of people she'd mistaken for friends over the years. My parents never lived to see me succeed, she admitted. They died thinking I was ashamed of them. Dad worked as a janitor at the same hospital where he should have been practicing cardiology. Mom took in sewing from neighbors, hemming clothes for women who made in a day what she made in a month. They learned English, but they never stopped being Japanese inside. I learned English and tried to stop being anything else. Zara leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. What made you think you had to choose? The question hit like a physical blow. Akiko realized she'd been holding her breath for years, waiting for someone to ask exactly that. Because choosing both meant being treated like I didn't belong anywhere. Too Asian for American boardrooms. Too American for my own family gatherings. I thought if I picked one, I could finally fit somewhere completely. She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Turns out, cutting yourself in half doesn't make you whole anywhere. Zara reached across the small table between them and gently touched Akiko's hand. The gesture was simple, natural, but Akiko couldn't remember the last time someone had touched her with such uncomplicated kindness. My grandmother used to say, "Baby girl, the world's gonna try to make you small in 1,000 different ways. Don't do their work for them." Zara's thumb traced across Akiko's knuckles. Maybe being both things isn't about fitting in. Maybe it's about making space for all of you to exist. Akiko stared at their joined hands, her pale fingers with their perfectly manicured nails against Zara's darker skin, marked with small burns from restaurant work and years of dreaming through exhaustion. Two women who shouldn't have anything in common, connected by the strange alchemy of authentic recognition. "Arigatou gozaimasu," Akiko whispered, meaning it more deeply than she'd meant anything in years. "Thank you for seeing me." Dueta Shimashite. Watashi emo anata and I meet Marat Ureshii Disu. You're welcome. I'm happy to be seen by you too. As dawn began to color the horizon beyond O'Hare's runways, they shared Zara's emergency granola bars and talked about everything. Akiko's secret love for K-dramas, Zara's dream of writing a book about language learning, the loneliness of being the smartest person in rooms full of people who underestimated them both. For the first time in decades, Akiko felt the peculiar lightness that comes from being genuinely known. What moments in your life have reminded you that authentic connection can happen in the most unexpected places? Tell us about a time when someone truly saw you. The announcement crackled through the terminal. Ladies and gentlemen, we're pleased to inform you that weather conditions have improved. Flight 847 to San Francisco will begin boarding in 30 minutes. Reality crashed back like cold water. Akiko's phone buzzed with 17 missed calls from her board members, her assistant, reporters wanting statements about the delayed investor meeting. The performance was about to resume. And as she watched Zara begin gathering her modest belongings, Akiko realized she was about to lose the first real conversation she'd had in years to the hungry machinery of her carefully constructed life. The first harsh fluorescent lights of dawn crept through the airport windows like an unwelcome truth. Akiko stirred from the chair where she'd fallen asleep, Zara's jacket still draped across her shoulders. For a moment, in that hazy space between sleep and consciousness, she felt peaceful, until reality crashed back with the force of a corporate audit. What had she done? Her phone buzzed incessantly. 17 missed calls from her board members, 43 emails marked urgent, and 3 text messages from her publicist asking why she'd been photographed fraternizing with service staff at the airport. Someone had captured them through the windows, her head on Zara's shoulder, both of them laughing, looking more relaxed than Akiko had appeared in any business magazine profile. Shit. The word escaped before she could stop it, sharp and ugly in the morning quiet. Zara's eyes fluttered open at the sound, and for just an instant, her smile was radiant, the same warmth that had carried them through the night. Good morning, sunshine. Ready for another day of conquering the world. But Akiko was already standing, shaking off the jacket like it burned her skin. I need to make some calls. Her voice had transformed back into the crisp, professional tone that had intimidated competitors for 2 decades. The walls were rebuilding themselves brick by brick, each one stamped with logos and stock prices and shareholder expectations. Akiko. Zara's smile faltered. Everything okay? It's Ms. Chen. The correction fell like a blade between them. And yes, everything's fine. Last night was. It was nice to pass the time. Thank you for the company. Pass the time. The words hung in the air like poison gas, turning everything they'd shared into something cheap and disposable. Zara's face shifted through confusion, hurt, and finally, a kind of resigned understanding that was somehow worse than anger. I see. Zara's voice was steady, but Akiko caught the slight tremor underneath. Well, I'm glad I could help you pass the time, Ms. Chen. Though I thought we passed something a little more meaningful than time. I have a reputation to maintain. Akiko's fingers were already flying over her phone, typing damage control messages. Last night was an anomaly. A moment of weakness. I can't afford moments like that. A moment of weakness. Zara stood slowly, and suddenly she seemed taller than she had hours before. Is that what you call it when someone shows you who they really are? When they trust you enough to let you see past the facade? You don't understand the pressures I'm under. The expectations. No, I understand perfectly. Zara's voice cut through the excuse like steel. I understand that you'd rather betray the person you were 3 hours ago than risk your precious investors thinking you're human. I understand that all your talk about feeling invisible was just self-pity from someone who chooses to hide. The accusation hit like a physical blow. That's not fair. Fair. Zara laughed, but there was no humor in it. Fair would have been you having the courage to be the woman who cried in my arms about feeling lost. Fair would have been you treating our conversation like it mattered instead of something embarrassing to cover up. Akiko's hands were shaking as she scrolled through the photos someone had leaked online. Comments poured in, Akiko Chen slumming it with the help? And when CEOs forget their place and worse things she couldn't bear to read. Her stock price was already dropping in pre-market trading. You see this. She thrust the phone toward Zara, her voice rising with panic. This is what happens when I let my guard down. This is what authenticity costs in my world. Zara glanced at the screen, and something died in her eyes. So that's what I am to you now. A PR disaster? A mistake that needs managing. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Zara picked up her own bag, moving with deliberate calm. You know what the saddest part is? I actually thought you were brave. I thought building a billion-dollar company took real courage. But it turns out you're just another coward in expensive clothes. So terrified of being seen that you'd rather die of loneliness than risk being truly known. Zara, please. No. The finality in Zara's voice stopped Akiko cold. Don't make this harder than it already is. Go back to your glass tower and your board meetings and your perfectly acceptable isolation. Convince yourself that being understood is a luxury you can't afford. But don't you dare contact me when the loneliness gets too heavy to carry. She paused at the gate entrance, not turning around. And for what it's worth, the woman I spent last night with, the real Akiko, not Ms. Chen, was worth 1,000 of those people judging her online. But I guess she doesn't think so. The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal as Zara disappeared down the jetway, leaving Akiko surrounded by everything she'd fought so hard to protect. Her reputation, her image, her careful distance from anything that might make her appear weak or different or wonderfully, dangerously human. She sank back into the chair, still warm from where Zara had been sleeping, and for the first time in her adult life, Akiko Chun felt the true cost of her success. It wasn't measured in dollars or market share or magazine covers. It was measured in the space between who she was and who she allowed herself to be. A space that suddenly felt vast enough to swallow her whole. Her phone rang. The board meeting. The investors. The performance that never ended. She answered on the first ring, her voice steady and professional and completely, utterly empty. This is Ms. Chen. The San Francisco boardroom on the 42nd floor of the Salesforce Tower felt like a glass cage suspended between heaven and earth. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Akiko could see the Bay Bridge stretching toward Oakland, its steel cables catching the morning light like spider silk. In 3 hours, she would present her company's 5-year expansion plan to the board that held her future in their manicured hands. She sat alone at the mahogany table, her presentation notes scattered before her like fallen leaves. The words on the pages blurred together. Market penetration, synergistic opportunities, global scalability. Corporate poetry that said everything and nothing about what truly mattered. Her phone buzzed with messages from her PR team, her CFO, her army of advisors, all offering last-minute strategies to secure the board's approval. But all she could hear was Zara's voice from that night at O'Hare, speaking Japanese with the gentle cadence of someone who had learned it from love, not obligation. Honto no jibun da iru yuki ga aramasu ka? Do you have the courage to be your real self? The question had haunted her through 3 sleepless nights in her Pacific Heights mansion, echoing through rooms filled with modern art and emptiness. She had built her empire by being what others expected, the assimilated success story, the proof that America's meritocracy worked for anyone willing to shed their foreignness like an old coat. But in that airport terminal, speaking Japanese with a woman who saw beyond her title and bank account, she had remembered what it felt like to breathe. Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ms. Chen, the board members are arriving. Shall I escort them to the conference room?" "5 more minutes," Akiko whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of climate control systems. She opened her laptop and stared at the PowerPoint slides she had rehearsed until they felt like prayer beads worn smooth by repetition. Slide 17 contained her vision for expanding into Asian markets, a clinical analysis of demographic trends and purchasing power that reduced her homeland to profit margins and consumer segments. She had written it in English, thought it in English, dreamed it in English. But what if she didn't? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling like autumn leaves before they fell. Slowly, deliberately, she began to type in Japanese characters, each symbol a small act of rebellion against the woman she had trained herself to become. Meanwhile, 1,500 miles away in Detroit, Zara Washington stood in the employee break room of the Renaissance Center's 35th floor restaurant, her uniform crisp and pressed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The letter in her hands bore the letterhead of the University of Tokyo's International Studies program, the teaching exchange opportunity she had applied for 6 months ago, before that night in Chicago changed everything. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected." The words swam before her eyes. 3 months in Japan, teaching English to corporate executives, living in Shibuya, walking the same streets where Akiko had learned to dream in 2 languages. It was everything she had worked toward through double shifts and midnight study sessions, every vocabulary card and grammar drill leading to this moment. But accepting meant leaving her mother's physical therapy appointments, her younger brother's college applications, the fabric of responsibility she had woven around herself like a protective shawl. Her family needed her here, in the familiar geography of struggle and small victories. "You gonna stand there all day reading that thing, or you gonna tell us what's got you looking like you seen a ghost?" Shanice, her coworker, appeared in the doorway with a knowing smile. "It's nothing," Zara started, then stopped. The lie felt foreign on her tongue after a week of replaying Akiko's words about authenticity, about the cost of hiding who you really are. "Actually, it's everything. I got accepted to teach in Japan." Shanice's eyes widened. "Girl, that's what you've been working toward forever. Why do you look like somebody died?" "Because taking it means leaving y'all. It means being selfish for the first time in my life." "Or maybe," Shanice said gently, settling into the plastic chair across from her, "it means being brave enough to show the world what we already know, that you got gifts that don't fit in no uniform." Through the break room's small window, Zara could see the Detroit River flowing toward Lake Huron, carrying water that had traveled from distant mountains to this moment. She thought about Akiko, probably sitting in some gleaming boardroom right now, choosing between safety and truth. How many dreams had they both buried under other people's expectations? Back in San Francisco, Akiko heard the boardroom door open, the rustle of expensive suits and Italian leather shoes as 12 of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley took their seats around the table. Board Chairman William Morrison cleared his throat, the same man who had once introduced her at a conference as surprisingly articulate for someone from her background. "Akiko, we're eager to hear your vision for the future." She stood slowly, her presentation remote feeling heavier than mountains in her palm. The slides advanced automatically. Market analysis, competitive landscape, projected returns. Her voice moved through the familiar cadences of corporate speak while her mind traveled to a different place entirely. Halfway through her presentation, something shifted. Instead of the rehearsed English phrases about leveraging cultural insights, she found herself speaking about omotenashi, the Japanese principle of selfless service that had shaped her company's customer relations philosophy. The word felt strange and wonderful in her mouth, like tasting childhood after years of bitter coffee. Do you think it's possible to be too successful for your own good? When have you had to choose between fitting in and standing out? Let me know your thoughts. Your story might inspire someone else. I apologize, she said, her voice steadier than it had been in months. But I need to share something with you that isn't in these slides. Something about who we really are as a company, and who I really am as your CEO. The room fell silent except for the whisper of recycled air through invisible vents. Morrison's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline like surprised caterpillars. 3 nights ago, Akiko continued, I was reminded that authenticity isn't just a buzzword we put in mission statements. It's the courage to bring your whole self to the work that matters. And I realize I haven't been doing that. She clicked on a new slide, one she had created an hour ago, written in both Japanese and English. The characters floated on the screen like small prayers made visible. This company was built on innovation but also on the Japanese concept of kaizen, continuous improvement through small, daily changes. Not just in our products, but in ourselves. And I want to talk about how that principle, rooted in my heritage, can guide us into markets we've never imagined. For the next 30 minutes, she spoke with a fluency that came not from rehearsal but from truth. She talked about her grandmother's resilience, her parents' sacrifices, the ways that cultural wisdom could inform technological advancement. She used Japanese terms when English felt insufficient, translating not just words but entire worldviews for an audience that had never seen her as anything more than a bottom line. When she finished, the silence stretched like a held breath. Morrison leaned back in his leather chair, his expression unreadable. That was, he paused, searching for words, unexpected. The best presentations usually are, replied Margaret Walsh, the only other woman on the board. Her eyes held a warmth Akiko had never noticed before. When do we start? In Detroit, Zara folded the acceptance letter carefully and placed it in her locker next to a photo of her family and a vocabulary card that read Yum were a Kiramanade. Don't give up on your dreams. She had made her choice, but first, she had a phone call to make. She dialed the number she had memorized but never used, her heart hammering as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. This is Akiko Chen. Ms. Chen, this is Zara Washington. I'm from Chicago. From the airport. She took a breath that felt like jumping off a cliff. I think it's time we finished our conversation. 6 months later, the California sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Chen Industries' new Los Angeles headquarters in Century City. Akiko stood before a room filled with tech leaders, venture capitalists, and journalists. But this time, something was different. The severe bun was gone, replaced by her natural waves. The diamond earrings caught the light, but now they were joined by a delicate jade bracelet. Her grandmother's, finally brought out of hiding. Before I unveil our new AI platform, she began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had stopped pretending, I want to share something personal. 3 years ago, I spoke only English in boardrooms because I believed my success depended on erasing half of who I am. Today, I want to introduce our revolutionary language learning AI in the language that taught me the power of connection. She took a breath and switched to Japanese, her voice warm and fluid. Kokoro kara kokoro e, from heart to heart. That's what technology should do. The room was silent, But this time it wasn't the cold silence of incomprehension. It was the electric quiet of witnessing something authentic. As applause erupted, Akiko's eyes found a familiar face in the back of the room. Zara Washington, no longer in a server's uniform but dressed in professional attire, stood near the presentation screen, beaming with pride. 6 months ago, when Akiko had finally found the courage to call the restaurant in Chicago, she discovered Zara had already quit, chasing her dream of teaching English in Japan. But dreams, Akiko had learned, were meant to be supported, not abandoned. After the presentation, as the crowd mingled over sake and California wines, the two women found themselves on the rooftop terrace overlooking the sprawling city. "Your Japanese is improved," Zara said with a gentle smile, the Los Angeles skyline painting golden highlights in her hair. "I had a good teacher remind me why it mattered." Akiko's voice carried none of the corporate polish from that night at O'Hare, just gratitude. "How are you settling into the cultural exchange director position?" Zara laughed, the same musical sound that had broken through Akiko's walls in that airport lounge. "You mean your completely made-up position that somehow comes with an amazing salary and the chance to build bridges between American students and Japanese universities?" "I prefer to call it identifying untapped talent in unexpected places." Akiko's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Besides, someone once told me that being seen for who you really are is the rarest gift. I thought it was time to give that gift to others." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip toward the Pacific. The city sprawled below them, a tapestry of dreams and ambitions, of people hiding and seeking, of connections waiting to be made. "Akiko," Zara said softly, using her real name as she had that night in Chicago, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't spoken up? If I just stayed quiet like I was supposed to?" Akiko turned to face her fully, remembering the scared woman who had whispered, "Nani ga okadai are you no?" in that marble-cold dining room, asking what was happening when everything felt like it was falling apart. "I think," she said carefully, "we would have both stayed invisible. You in your uniform, me behind my corporate mask. But you were brave enough to see me when I couldn't see myself. And you were brave enough to let yourself be seen." The rooftop door opened, and Maria appeared. "Ms. Chen, the Toyota executives are here for the partnership meeting. Tell them I'll be right there." Akiko squeezed Zara's hand. "Want to help me explain why our AI platform will revolutionize how Japanese companies train American employees?" Zara's grin was radiant. In perfect Japanese, of course. As they walked toward the door, Zara called back to the sunset, "Kokoro kara kokoro-e." "From heart to heart," Akiko echoed, and for the first time in her adult life, she meant it completely. Inside, the Toyota executives rose as the two women entered. Akiko began in English, professional and poised, but when she introduced the cultural components of their AI system, she seamlessly switched to Japanese. And when she needed to explain the nuances of American business culture, Zara stepped forward, her fluent Japanese bridging worlds that had seemed impossible to connect. Later, as contracts were signed and champagne was poured, Akiko caught her reflection in the conference room window. The woman looking back wasn't the polished, untouchable CEO from 6 months ago. She was someone more complete, American ambition tempered with Japanese wisdom, corporate success softened by genuine connection. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Watched your presentation online. Mom would be proud. I'm proud. Come home for dinner Sunday. I'm making her recipe for miso soup." Looking back on this journey of two women finding themselves through each other, what connections have changed your life? Sometimes the most meaningful relationships come from the most unexpected moments. What's your story of an unexpected connection? Share below. Your experience might inspire someone else to be brave enough to truly see and be seen. As the evening wound down and Los Angeles glittered like scattered diamonds below them, Akiko and Zara stood once more on the rooftop, but this time they weren't strangers stranded by circumstance. They were two women who had found in each other not just friendship, but the courage to become who they were always meant to be. "Thank you," Akiko said quietly, "for speaking Japanese to a stranger." "Thank you," Zara replied, "for teaching me that being invisible isn't the same as being safe." The California stars emerged one by one overhead, and somewhere in the city below, other souls were learning the truth that Akiko and Zara had discovered in a Chicago airport. That recognition, true recognition, can happen in an instant, but building a life worthy of that recognition takes courage, vulnerability, and the revolutionary act of refusing to hide who you really are. In Japanese, they called it ikigai, the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. But Akiko and Zara had learned something even more precious. Sometimes ikigai includes finding the person who sees your true self and calls it beautiful. Thanks for sticking with this story till the very end. But trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. The next story is crazier, more shocking, and will blow your mind. Click the image on your screen now and dive right in. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a single twist.